Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we sift through, mountains of information, the whole colossal archive of human knowledge,
Yeah.
and we try to distill it down into pure essential insight for you.
And today we are really stepping into the realm of the Titans.
We really are. We're not just diving into film history today. We're talking about an artist whose legacy is so profound, it feels like it shaped, well, every blockbuster, every psychological drama, and every sweeping epic that came after him.
We are indeed.
Yeah.
Our subject today is Akira Kurosawa. He lived from 1910 to 1998, a name that just, stands alone in the history of cinema. It's synonymous with this incredible dramatic intensity, unparalleled technical mastery.
And stories that just resonated everywhere,
Okay.
universally.
Right. He directed 30 feature films across 6 decades. And if you look at the source material, the consistent thing you hear from his peers, from Lucas, Scorsese, Bergman, Fellini, is that he influenced almost everyone.
And what really defines Kurosawa, what sets him apart and earns him that title, the Emperor of Cinema, is his sheer, singular creative control. Our sources really highlight that he wasn't just the director. He was, at the same time, the writer, the producer, and the editor on his films. I mean, he was the master builder on set.
That holistic approach, what people call the auteur theory, it applied perfectly to him. It's exceptionally rare. And it speaks directly to the command he had over his finished product.
So when you watch a Kurosawa film, you're not just watching a movie.
No. You are experiencing Kurosawa's vision completely. It's crafted by him layer by layer, from the very foundation of the script all the way to the rhythm of the final cut.
So our mission today is to cut through this massive, influential body of work and really understand the essential nuggets, the traumatic childhood influences, the key technical innovations that are, believe it or not, still used today, and the crucial collaborations and, well, the collapses that forged his global reputation.
So if you want a crash course on why figures like George Lucas and Ingmar Bergman just revered him, you're in the right place.
We're going to give you the shortcut to appreciation. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start at the very beginning of this monumental life. Akira Kurosawa was born on March 23, 1910, in Tokyo. And when we look at his family background, we immediately see this fascinating contradiction that seems to define his whole character.
Absolutely. His father, Isamu, came from a samurai family, which is a background that implies, discipline, tradition, formality.
The old ways.
Exactly. But Isamu was remarkably progressive. He was, in effect, a forward-thinking man in a very traditional position. This wasn't some rigid conservative household. Isamu actively believed in the educational merit of cinema and theater.
Which is pretty unusual for the time, right?
Oh, very unusual. And he encouraged young Akira to watch films from the incredibly early age of 6. That instilled a love for visual storytelling and narrative scale right from the get-go.
So he's absorbing narratives, both Eastern and Western, from the very start. But the truly formative and, frankly, traumatic influence came from outside the home.
It did. And it's centered on his older brother, Haigo, and the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923.
This sounds pivotal.
This is a massive psychological pivot point.
Yeah.
I'd argue it's the single most important moment in shaping his artistic temperament. When the earthquake and the firestorms and the subsequent massacre struck Tokyo, Kurosawa was only 13. The devastation was just widespread.
Unimaginable.
The streets were littered with corpses, both human and animal. And when Akira tried to turn away from this overwhelming horror, Hugo, who was working as a silent film narrator, he forced him to look.
He demanded that his younger brother confront it. That's a brutal, defining lesson for a kid.
Exactly. And the source material suggests this profound incident instilled in Kurosawa a willingness, maybe even a responsibility, to confront and explore unpleasant truths directly in his work.
No matter how difficult or graphic they might be for the audience.
Right. And we see this unflinching realism later in films like Ikiru, which just stares mortality in the face, and especially in the savage historical violence he depicts in epics like Ran.
He learned early on that turning away from the horror doesn't make it disappear.
That's it. Before film, though, Kurosawa was an artist. He planned to be a painter, he exhibited work, and he even briefly joined the left-wing Proletarian Artists League.
But that pursuit didn't last.
No, mostly because of financial struggle. He just couldn't make a living. And more importantly, he lost his ideological enthusiasm for the movement itself. He saw that brand of art as just putting unfulfilled political ideals directly onto the canvas.
So he felt it lacked genuine depth.
Yeah, or cinematic power. He needed a medium that engaged with the world more directly.
And then came this immense personal loss that really precipitated his final career pivot.
A huge loss. The tragic death of his brother Haigo in 1933, who committed suicide. Haigo, as we mentioned, was a silent film narrator, a benshi.
Can you explain what a benshi was? It was a really unique profession.
Oh, totally unique. The benshi was a performer who would stand right next to the screen during a silent film and provide live narration. All the voices, all the emotion. They basically created the entire auditory experience for the audience.
A beautiful art form, but one that was professionally doomed.
Precisely. The rise of synchronized sound, the talkies,
Yeah.
it meant the rapid professional collapse of the entire benshi class. So Haigo's professional tragedy was all wrapped up in his personal despair.
And that wasn't the only loss.
No. Just 4 months later, Kurosawa lost his eldest brother as well. That left the 23-year-old Akira as the sole surviving brother, carrying this tremendous, unarticulated sense of loss that must have just pushed him to find a stable, viable, and deeply expressive path forward in the medium that had, in a way, taken his brother's profession from him.
And that stable path opened up in 1935 when Kurosawa applied for an assistant director position at Photochemical Laboratories, PCL.
Which later merged into the giant studio Toho.
Right. And the story of his application essay is, well, it's legendary. It's pure Kurosawa confidence.
It really is.
Yeah.
He was asked to discuss the fundamental deficiencies of Japanese film and propose fixes. And Kurosawa's response was just so blunt, almost mocking. He basically said that if the deficiencies were truly fundamental, there was no way for him to fix them.
That's audacious.
Incredibly. But that audacious honesty and his confident analysis really impressed the director Kajiro Yamamoto, who immediately insisted Kurosawa be hired, despite the cheekiness.
And Yamamoto quickly became this huge figure in Kurosawa's development, his primary professional mentor.
For 5 absolutely crucial years, Kurosawa worked on 17 films under Yamamoto. He was promoted fast to chief assistant director, and his duties were incredibly extensive. This wasn't just, fetching coffee.
Right.
He was location scouting, polishing scripts, managing lighting and construction, editing. He was even doing second unit directing on films like Horse in 1941. He was getting a master class in every single facet of filmmaking.
And the source material is very clear about the core lesson Yamamoto drilled into him.
That a good director must first master screenwriting.
And that advice just defined Kurosawa's entire career.
It did. He took it to heart. He recognized that control starts with the narrative blueprint. Not only did he write or co-write all of his own films, but writing screenplays for other directors became a lucrative sideline that continued long after he was famous. He understood that mastering the words gave him command over the eventual image.
All of this practical experience finally culminates in his directorial debut, which arrives right at the height of the Pacific War.
Sanshiro Sugata, 1943. Kurosawa secured the project after just devouring the source novel and insisted that Toho buy the rights for him. It was a critical and commercial success right out of the gate.
But even that success came with the heavy hand of wartime censorship.
Oh, yeah. The Japanese authorities cut 18 minutes of what they decided was British-American content.
His next film, The Most Beautiful, from 1944, reveals his dedication to realism and his unconventional methods, even when making what was essentially a propaganda film about female factory workers.
He shot it in a semi-documentary style, but his directing technique was totally immersive. To get genuine performances, he had the actresses live in a real factory for weeks during the shoot.
He had them eat the factory food, call each other by their character names.
Exactly. He was demanding a method approach, a truly lived-in performance, and that deep immersion became a hallmark of his career. It also had a lasting personal effect.
Right. He married the film's lead actress, Yuko Yaguchi, in May of 45.
And they stayed together until her death 40 years later. So his professional methods literally cemented his personal life.
But then we have The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail from 1945, which was completed just as Japan surrendered. And this one has a truly farcical censorship history.
It's the ultimate example of being caught between two rigid worlds. The film was based on a famous kabuki play, and it starred the popular comedian Inoken. During production, the Japanese wartime censors just savaged it.
Right.
They called it too Western and democratic. They specifically hated Inoken's comic porter character, who brought this kind of irreverence to a serious historical tale.
But then the war ends, the U.S. occupation begins, and the American censors step in, only to ban it for the exact opposite reason.
Exactly. The American occupation censors found it too feudal.
They disliked the traditional historical setting and its reverence for certain samurai codes.
So it was simultaneously too progressive for the wartime Japanese regime and too traditional for the American occupiers.
It was stuck in this bureaucratic and political limbo, and it was only finally released 7 years later in 1952. It's such a powerful metaphor for Kurosawa's entire career, constantly having to bridge or fall between the divides of East and West.
Moving into the post-war era, Japan was fundamentally changing, and Kurosawa sought to realign his work with the democratic ideals of the occupation, focusing his narrative squarely on the individual.
This is the era of No Regrets for Our Youth from 1946, which is a film that directly criticized Japan's pre-war political regime and its oppressive conformity. It centers on this heroic female protagonist, Yuki.
And she's questioning her own comfortable upper-middle-class values.
Right, during a political crisis. It was a controversial but popular hit. Variations of the title actually became a post-war catchphrase, signaling this new spirit of inquiry in Japan.
And then, in 1947, a pivotal moment happens that would define the next 2 decades of his filmmaking: the discovery of Toshiro Mifune.
Mifune's initial audition story is just fantastic. He showed up and was described as polarizing. I mean, he was raw, intense, aggressive.
He had a physical vitality that casting agents just didn't know what to do with.
Exactly. Kurosawa and his mentor, Yamamoto, had to directly intervene and persuade Toho to sign this intense young actor because they recognized immediately that this wasn't just talent, this was volcanic energy waiting to be unleashed.
And that volcanic energy quickly erupted in Drunken Angel in 1948. Many critics consider this his first major work where he truly found his voice.
And Kurosawa himself felt this was the first film where he could truly express himself freely, despite the constant pressure of American censorship rewrites. It was a gritty story set in the post-war black market.
About a doctor trying to save a volatile young gangster.
Right. The doctor was played by the marvelous Takashi Shimura, who was in over 20 Kurosawa films. But the gangster was Mifune.
And Shimura was the title character, the doctor, but our sources stress that it was Mifune's explosive performance that just overshadowed the entire film.
It electrified audiences immediately. Mifune was defiant, rebellious, fiercely physical, and critics quickly compared his impact to that of Marlon Brando arriving on the American scene just a few years later. This was the start of a unique professional symbiosis.
And they would go on to make 16 films together.
A partnership built on mutual respect and often very intense conflict.
Following that was Stray Dog in 1949, which used a police procedural framework to explore the mood of Japan's painful recovery.
It's a key post-war film, co-written with Ryozo Kikushima. It follows Mifune as a detective searching for his stolen pistol. But what is so technically audacious about it is this stunning, virtually wordless 8-minute sequence.
Where the detective is searching the war-ravaged streets of Tokyo disguised as a veteran?
Right. And that sequence used actual documentary footage, shot by none other than Ishiro Honda, the future director of Godzilla, creating this raw, visceral look at the psychological landscape of defeat. It proved Kurosawa could turn genre fiction into profound social commentary.
So if Drunken Angel was his major Japanese breakthrough, then Rashomon from 1950 was the seismic, defining event that launched Kurosawa and Japanese cinema itself onto the global stage.
Rashomon is the ultimate game changer. It was co-written with Shinobu Hashimoto, and it's based on a story that recounts a murder and a rape from these dramatically different, conflicting points of view.
But when it premiered in Tokyo, the reception was lukewarm, puzzled.
Yeah, even indifferent.
Yeah.
Critics didn't know what to make of its unique structure, its thematic ambiguity. Japanese audiences who are accustomed to more linear narratives, they just found the fractured, subjective viewpoint confusing. They were asking, so what's the truth?
But then it gets entered into the 1951 Venice Film Festival.
Without Kurosawa's knowledge initially, and it wins the Golden Lion.
Which shocked the entire international film world.
Absolutely. The West was largely unaware of Japan's deep, sophisticated cinematic tradition. And its subsequent commercial success in the U.S. RKO bought the distribution rights, and it earned an almost unheard of $35,000 in its first 3 weeks at a single New York theater.
That created a global vogue for Japanese cinema throughout the 1950s.
It did. Kurosawa didn't just achieve fame for himself. He smashed the cultural barrier for other masters like Kenji Mizoguchi and Yasujiro Ozu. They finally gained international recognition because Kurosawa proved Japanese films were viable export material.
That is a colossal legacy, opening up an entire national cinema to the world, and immediately after that he returns to Toho and delivers a modern-day masterpiece, Ikiru.
Ikiru, which means to live,
is profoundly moving. It starred Takashi Shimura as Kanji Watanabe, a monotonous, cancer-ridden bureaucrat who's seeking meaning in his final months.
And he adapted it from Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich.
Right, which cemented his ability to synthesize Western literary tragedy with a modern Japanese setting. The subject matter is grim, but the film is often discussed for its sharp, satirical style.
It is. He co-wrote this with Hashimoto and Hideo Oguni, who would become another longtime collaborator. And despite the, imminent death theme, they used satire, which was compared favorably to Bertolt Brecht, aimed squarely at the hero's stifling bureaucracy and the rising tide of American cultural colonization.
You see that with the ubiquitous presence of American pop songs on the soundtrack.
And it was wildly successful. It earned Kurosawa his second Kinema Junpo Best Film Award and became the most acclaimed of all his films set in the modern era.
So after addressing post-war mortality and bureaucracy, Kurosawa returns to the period epic, culminating in what many consider the definitive action film in history. Seven Samurai.
1954. This project was just monumental.
It was. Kurosawa took a simple premise. A poor farming village hires masterless samurai to defend them against 40 bandits, and he gave it a 3.5-hour epic treatment.
The investment required was staggering.
148 days of shooting, spread over almost an entire year. They endured a freezing winter shoot, and it was, at the time, the most expensive Japanese film ever made. It blew past its budget and schedule significantly.
But the reputation of the film today speaks for itself.
It was a huge hit internationally, even with the heavy edits made by U.S. distributors. Its critical standing has only grown, culminating in it being voted the best Japanese film ever made by critics in 1999.
And in the 2022 BFI Sight and Sound poll, it placed 20th among critics and tied for 14th among directors globally.
It just confirms its status as this timeless template for action and character study.
Incredible to think about the pressure following that. Shifting back to contemporary issues, he followed it up with I Live in Fear in 1955, conceived during a time of intense nuclear anxiety in Japan.
That anxiety was very real. In 1954, you had radioactive rainstorms in Japan and the disastrous Fukui Maru fishing boat incident. This fear of annihilation was palpable.
And the film focuses on an elderly factory owner, played by Mifune.
Right, who is so convinced a nuclear attack is coming that he becomes obsessed with moving his entire extended family to Brazil for safety.
It sounds incredibly topical, yet it was his first film to actually lose money during its original theatrical run.
It was just out of step with the mood. Japan was focused on high-speed economic growth and recovery. They didn't want to contemplate nuclear dread. Today, though, it's rightfully regarded as one of the finest psychological explorations of the global nuclear stalemate.
It also marked a sad professional transition.
It did. Kurosawa's longtime composer, Fumio Hayasaka, died during the shoot, and the score had to be finished by his student, Masaru Sato, who then became Kurosawa's primary composer for the next 8 films.
Kurosawa's ability to merge global literary classics with Japanese history yielded some of his most famous period pieces, particularly his Shakespeare adaptations.
Throne of Blood, from 1957, is an ambitious, masterful adaptation of Macbeth, set in the Sengoku era. And Kurosawa specifically directed his cast to strip away any residual Western theatricality.
The acting style, particularly Isuzu Yamada's chilling performance as Lady Macbeth,
drew heavily on the stylized, highly controlled movements of traditional Japanese no-theater techniques. It remains highly celebrated among Shakespeare adaptations globally, precisely because it finds a new, authentic visual language for the old story.
After tackling 2 huge epics, he needed a commercial hit. And that arrived with The Hidden Fortress in 1958.
A very conscious choice to make a lighter, more purely entertaining action-adventure comedy drama to counter the pessimism of his preceding films. And it became an enormous box office success. It was also his first film using the new Tooscope widescreen format, which really enhanced the epic visual sweep.
But the real nugget here is its massive direct influence on American cinema.
Absolutely. The Hidden Fortress, which chronicles a princess, her General Mifune, of course, and 2 bumbling peasants traversing enemy lines.
It became the main structural and thematic blueprint for George Lucas's Star Wars.
It did. Lucas famously borrowed the entire concept of telling a high-stakes adventure story primarily through the eyes of 2 low-status, bumbling characters, which of course became C-3PO and R2-D2.
Okay, so here's where the Mifune era hits its absolute peak. The 1960s, starting with Yojimbo in 1961, featuring the masterless samurai Senjuro.
Yojimbo is a monumental film. It basically wrote the rules for the spaghetti Western genre,
a full 3 years before Sergio Leone hit the scene.
He played explicitly with Western genre conventions, the nameless, wandering, morally ambiguous hero.
And it offered an unprecedentedly graphic portrayal of violence for the Japanese screen at the time. Yeah. It was a massive commercial and critical success. It earned more than any previous Kurosawa film.
And its success led directly to an international scandal and a lawsuit.
Precisely. Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars from 1964 was an unauthorized virtual scene-by-scene remake. He just transposed the action to the American West.
So Toho, Kurosawa's producer, filed a lawsuit.
And won a significant out-of-court settlement. This financial and legal victory was a defining moment. It illustrated just how powerful Kurosawa's intellectual property had become on the global stage.
He then broke his own box office record again in 1963 with the intense modern suspense film High and Low.
Based on the American novel King's Ransom by Ed McBain, Kurosawa intended it as a scathing condemnation of kidnapping, focusing on the moral cost of wealth. It was hugely successful, breaking his box office record for the 3rd time in a row.
But there's a deeply unsettling irony here.
Oh yeah. The film was widely blamed for a wave of real-life kidnappings in Japan, and Kurosawa himself received threats targeting his young daughter, Kazuko. The success he sought was having these real-world, terrifying consequences.
Finally, we reach the end of this epoch with Redbeard in 1965.
This film, set in a mid-19th century clinic for the poor, exploring humanist themes of service and humility, it was an exhausting process. It was Kurosawa's longest shoot, taking well over a year.
And it focuses on the conflict between a cynical young doctor and the stern, wise Dr. Nide, Redbeard, played by Mifune.
Right, and it was a huge financial success, the highest-grossing Japanese production of the year. But critically, it marked the end of the legendary Kurosawa-Mifune partnership.
A profound and lasting professional split.
It was. Kurosawa himself noted at the time that filming felt like a cycle had ended, suggesting his relationship with Mifune is creatively exhausted. For reasons never publicly explained, Redbeard was the last film they made together. And that break, coupled with the collapse of the Japanese studio system due to television, it set the stage for the enormous professional turbulence of the late 1960s.
Before we jump into those turbulent, almost devastating years, we absolutely have to pause and examine how Kurosawa worked, because his singular style is what makes his films so timeless. We talked about his multiple roles: director, writer, editor, producer, all wrapped up in the famous Kurosawa Gumi.
The Kurosawa Gumi, or Kurosawa Group, was his dedicated, loyal team of frequent collaborators. This was essential for maintaining his quality control and his hands-on approach.
It included key technical people like cinematographer Asakazu Nakai,
Actors like Takashi Shimura, and invaluable support staff like production assistant Teruyo Nogami.
What specifically did this group enable him to do that other directors just couldn't?
They allowed him to achieve total command. For instance, he considered a high-quality script the firm foundation of a good film. So he worked incredibly closely with his co-writers, like Shinobu Hashimoto and Hideo Guni, right from the film's initial development.
And he meticulously pre-visualized everything.
His famous, detailed concept drawings, his storyboards, were often works of art themselves. They effectively served as the finished film's blueprint before a single camera even rolled. This level of consistency and high standard was only achievable through the deep trust inherent to the Kurosawa Gumi.
Let's get granular on his technical style. When you watch his mature work, certain editing choices just leap out immediately, especially the optical effect known as the wipe.
The wipe became his signature transitional device. It's a form of cinematic punctuation. It's an optical printer effect where a line or a bar appears to sweep across the screen, cleanly wiping away one scene and instantly revealing the next. It's sharp, decisive, dynamic.
Why did he favor this over, say, a smooth dissolve or a simple straight cut?
Well, it creates this forceful narrative stop. It's almost like closing one chapter and opening another with a crisp motion. It's been suggested that Kurosawa may have been, consciously or unconsciously, nodding to the traditions of silent film and even kabuki theater, where clear, physical, and dramatic transitions are essential.
So he was making the act of transition part of the drama rather than hiding it.
Exactly. He also utilized the axial cut frequently, particularly in his 1940s and 1950s films.
This is a highly effective, if sometimes jarring, technique.
It is. It's a series of matched jump cuts where the camera suddenly shifts dramatically, moving either much closer to or farther away from the subject, but without using a smooth tracking shot. It creates an almost dizzying sense of immediacy and focus.
Pulling the viewer right into the character's emotional space.
Right. Often used when revealing an intense reaction or a moment of crisis. It breaks convention, to heighten dramatic effect.
And the simple concept of cut-on motion became foundational to how he directed and edited action.
Absolutely. This is the technique that defines the kinetic energy of his battle scenes. Instead of capturing a complex motion, like a man drawing a sword, in one uninterrupted shot.
He breaks it down across 2 or more shots.
Right. The audience sees the start of the draw in one shot and the finish action in the next. This creates a highly dynamic, energetic flow, accelerating the movement and amplifying the visceral impact of the action sequence. Modern action choreography owes a massive debt to Kurosawa's use of the cut-on motion.
We also need to talk about sound, which he used with profound intelligence.
He was a master of the soundtrack, often favoring what's known as sound-image counterpoint. Most directors use music to emphasize the emotion of the image, sad music, for a sad scene. Kurosawa, however, frequently used music or sound effects that would comment ironically on the image.
Or introduce a subtle tension.
Yes. For example, playing cheerful American pop music during a scene of deep social decay in Akira. This forces the audience to process 2 slightly conflicting messages simultaneously, adding immense nuance and depth to the emotional landscape of the film.
Looking across his entire filmography, distinct philosophical and structural themes emerge again and again. One of the most important is the mentor-disciple relationship.
This is a consistent narrative framework, isn't it? Often featuring an older master and 1 or more novices. Think of the relationship between Mifune's wild samurai and the village recruits in Seven Samurai, or Shimura's red-beard doctor training the young Dr. Yasumoto.
And it's not just about passing on technical skills.
No, it's always centered on achieving spiritual mastery and self-control. It speaks to Kurosawa's own lifelong pursuit of craft and inner perfection.
And tied into that idea of mastery is the notion of the heroic champion, the exceptional individual.
He was fascinated by the person who rises above the crowd, whether it's a doctor, a detective, or a masterless samurai, to right a wrong or produce something significant. This links directly back to that strong sense of individual responsibility that defined his post-war filmmaking.
He also famously used extremes of weather as a dramatic device.
Oh, constantly. Think about the final muddy battle in Seven Samurai, or the harsh Siberian winter in Dersi Uzala. He used rain, wind, snow, and fog as both a potent, visual, dramatic device and a deep symbolic expression of human passion or internal turmoil.
It heightens the stakes while mirroring the emotional chaos of the situation.
Exactly. And speaking of chaos, his later epics depict truly savage, cyclical violence. Film scholar Stephen Prince notes that this theme, which often shows the futility of human conflict, began prominently with Throne of Blood and returned with immense bloody force in his 1980s epics like Kagemusha and Ran.
Now, this focus on the heroic champion, often a samurai, led to a persistent charge of elitism from within Japan.
It did. Some Japanese critics and filmmakers, including the influential Nagisa Shima, argued that Kurosawa was catering to Western tastes by focusing too heavily on these exceptional warrior figures, rather than depicting the masses, the peasantry.
They saw his focus as too westernized.
And insufficiently reflective of Japanese common life.
But Kurosawa himself offered a powerful rebuttal to this charge, didn't he?
He did, specifically in defense of Seven Samurai. He said, "I wanted to say that after everything, the peasants were the stronger, closely clinging to the earth. It was the samurai who were weak because they were being blown by the winds of time."
That's a powerful statement.
It explains his philosophy. The samurai's weakness ultimately served to highlight the enduring, silent strength and persistence of the common people. It was a sophisticated defense against a simplistic critique.
So by the mid-1960s, Kurosawa is 56. The Japanese film industry is troubled, costs are high, his collaboration with Mifune is over. He begins looking abroad for funding, leading to one of the darkest and most professionally devastating periods of his life.
The shift was almost immediately difficult. After his contract with Toho ended in 1966, his first foreign project, the action thriller Runaway Train for Embassy Pictures, it just fell apart.
Completely.
Due to logistical nightmares. It was supposed to be his first film in color and his first in English, but it was plagued by language barriers, repeated delays due to needing snow that never arrived. It was a mess.
And the film eventually got made 2 decades later, but his original vision just collapsed. Frustrating, yes, but nothing compared to the disaster that followed.
The Tora debacle in 1968 was an almost unmitigated tragedy, as Kurosawa's biographer called it.
This was a massive co-production with 20th Century Fox, intended to show the Pearl Harbor attack from both the U.S. and Japanese viewpoints. Kurosawa was set to helm the Japanese segment.
It sounds like a clash of two cinematic planets.
It was immediate and intense. Kurosawa struggled significantly with the unfamiliar, committee-driven Hollywood crew and system. He was a singular artist, used to commanding every detail. Hollywood was a bureaucracy.
And his script for the Japanese segment was over 4 hours long.
But he was only allocated 90 minutes of screen time. This led to numerous forced revisions that frustrated him immensely.
The outcome was a professional betrayal that almost ended his career.
After only 3 weeks of shooting, the American producers concluded that Kurosawa must be mentally ill. He was medically examined and diagnosed with neurasthenia, a 20th century catch-all term for chronic fatigue, severe anxiety, and manic excitement.
So basically a profound case of burnout and nervous exhaustion.
Right, so rather than addressing the creative or logistical conflict, the studio used a medical diagnosis to dismiss him.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, he was effectively fired due to fatigue.
And he had his name removed from the credits, even though the final Japanese script retained elements of his work. It was a humiliating public failure, orchestrated by the very system he had hoped would sustain him. The fallout was just devastating.
He became estranged from his longtime collaborator, Ryuzo Kikushima.
It had exposed corruption in his own company, and it led the entire industry, both foreign and domestic, to severely doubt his viability. He had spent years preparing for this grand return that just ended in failure and public disgrace.
To prove he wasn't finished, Kurosawa forms the Club of the Four Knights in 1969 with fellow directors Kisuke Kinoshita, Masaki Kobayashi, and Kon Ichikawa.
This collective was a deliberate effort to prove Kurosawa could still complete a film. And the result was Dodo Sakaden in 1970, his first work in color, shot quickly in 9 weeks on a limited budget. It was a defiant act of artistic expression.
And the visual style was a massive, almost surreal departure from his previous work.
Incredibly bold. The film used an almost psychedelic palette of primary colors, vivid blues, shocking reds, and oranges, to highlight the toxic environment where the poor and destitute characters lived.
But it lost money.
It lost money, was met with audience indifference, and the Club of the Four Knights dissolved almost immediately.
And this professional and financial despair culminated in the darkest moment of his personal life.
Yes. Unable to secure further funding, publicly humiliated, and struggling profoundly with his health, Kurosawa attempted suicide on December 22, 1971.
He survived.
He survived and retreated into domestic life, unsure if he would ever direct again. This was his professional and personal nadir, a crisis brought on by a complete artistic collapse.
But his international reputation held strong, and in 1973 a lifeline came from the Soviet Union.
Soviet studio Mosfilm approached him with an offer he couldn't refuse. Kurosawa accepted immediately, proposing an adaptation of an explorer's autobiographical work, Dersu Uzala, a story of a goldie hunter living in harmony with nature, which Kurosawa had wanted to film since the 1930s.
Directing for a major foreign power involved a grueling 2-year stay in the Soviet Union.
The Siberian shoot was extremely difficult, forcing Kurosawa and his crew to work in exceedingly harsh, remote natural conditions. But the film was completed, premiered in 1975, and achieved international success. It won the Golden Prize at the Moscow International Film Festival.
And an Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film?
Crucially, yes. It was external validation that proved, against all the doubts of the Japanese and Hollywood studios, that Kurosawa was still a creative force.
And this brings us to one of the most heartwarming and dramatically ironic stories in film history, the Lucas intervention.
George Lucas. His 1977 film Star Wars was heavily influenced by Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, and he discovered that his hero, this foundational genius, was still struggling desperately to fund a new project, despite the success of Dersu Uzala.
So Lucas leveraged his immense new influence in Hollywood.
He used that power to secure funding for Kurosawa's next epic, Kagemusha. And imagine the dramatic irony of this moment.
He essentially coerced 20th Century Fox,
the very same studio that had fired Kurosawa a decade earlier and labeled him mentally ill,
to produce his new film.
And to ensure stability, Lucas then recruited Francis Ford Coppola as co-producer, providing the institutional backing and creative support Kurosawa absolutely needed to avoid another catastrophic Hollywood interference.
Kagemusha, the Shadow Warrior, was the story of a thief hired as the double of a medieval lord.
It was a beautiful, monumental film. And despite production issues, Kurosawa fired his original lead actor, Shintaro Katsu. After Katsu insisted on videotaping his own performance, the film was a massive hit in Japan and abroad. It won the prestigious Palme d'Or at Cannes in 1980.
This film also highlighted Kurosawa's famous process of intense visual preparation.
He was celebrated for his detailed, highly chromatic concept drawings, his storyboards. He exhibited these drawings as art while promoting Kagemusha, effectively showing the public the meticulous blueprint he had used to visualize every single frame of the film long before shooting began. It showed his command was fully restored.
The success of Kagemusha set the stage for perhaps his final undisputed masterpiece, Ran.
1985. Ran, meaning chaos, is monumental cinema. It's another epic, loosely based on Shakespeare's King Lear, depicting a ruthless, bloodthirsty warlord betrayed by his three sons.
It required massive international financing.
Primarily from the French producer Serge Soberman, because Japanese studios remained too wary of the immense costs.
And the production was halted and marked by deep personal tragedy.
Yes, filming was temporarily halted when his beloved wife, Yuko, fell ill and then died in February 1985. Kurosawa, grief-stricken, returned to finish the film, and it premiered to huge critical acclaim, a visual and narrative triumph.
And despite its reception, it was involved in a major controversy surrounding the Academy Awards.
Japan controversially passed over Ran as its official entry for the Best Foreign Film Oscar due to confusing classification rules. Was it a Japanese or a French film, given the financing? So director Sidney Lumet, a huge admirer, successfully campaigned for Kurosawa to receive a Best Director nomination instead.
A tremendous show of international respect in the face of the snub by his home country.
It was. Crucially, after Ran, Kurosawa finally changed his typical answer about which of his films was his best.
For decades, whenever he was asked which of his films was his greatest, he always replied, "My next one."
Right. It reflected his constant ambition, the belief that he hadn't yet achieved perfection. But after Ran, he quietly cited it as his best film. It was the culmination of a lifetime of artistic and thematic vision.
Kurosawa continued working well into his 80s, focusing on films that were incredibly personal and reflective. Dreams, from 1990, was unique because it was entirely based on the director's own literal dreams.
It was his first deeply personal project, and the first time in over 40 years that he wrote the screenplay completely alone without his usual co-writing team. And once again, external American support was key.
Steven Spielberg.
Spielberg convinced Warner Bros. To buy the international rights, ensuring the film should be produced despite its non-commercial episodic structure.
1990 was also the year he received the ultimate validation from Hollywood, the Academy Award for Lifetime Achievement.
And this is where we get that famously humbling quote that has inspired generations of filmmakers. Accepting the award, the man who defined modern cinema said, "I'm a little worried because I don't feel that I understand cinema yet."
The greatest living master at age 80, expressing profound humility about his craft.
Amazing. His next film, Rhapsody in August from '91, was his first film fully produced in Japan in 2 decades and was perhaps his most politically contentious, exploring the scars of the Nagasaki nuclear bombing.
His intentions were to depict the human cost and the generational gap in dealing with that trauma.
But it received unexpected negative reaction, especially in the U.S., where Kurosawa was accused of promulgating anti-American sentiments, an accusation he publicly and vigorously rejected. He was just trying to document a national wound.
His final completed film was Madadayo in 1993, which translates to Not Yet.
Based on the life of a beloved Japanese professor of German, the narrative centers on his yearly birthday celebration with his former students, during which he declares, in a defiant toast, his unwillingness to die yet, Madadayo.
For the 81-year-old Kurosawa, who still had screenplays waiting, this was a poignant and profoundly relevant theme about the creative will to survive and continue working.
And though he continued to write, his hopes of directing again were tragically cut short.
He wrote The Sea is Watching and After the Rain in the mid-1990s, but while working on the latter in 1995, he suffered a slip that broke the base of his spine. This forced him into a wheelchair for the rest of his life, ending his directing career and, tragically, ending his long-held wish to die on set while shooting a film.
He died of a stroke on September 6, 1998, at the age of 88 in Tokyo.
The mark Kurosawa left on global cinema is just. It's hard to calculate. He's consistently cited as one of the greatest directors of all time, and in 1999, he was named Asian of the Century in the Arts, Literature, and Culture category by Asian Week magazine and CNN.
His reputation among fellow filmmakers is the ultimate testament to his influence.
Sure.
It's a phenomenon almost unmatched in cinema. The admiration he garnered from his peers across generations and continents is staggering. It demonstrates that his cinematic power truly crossed all cultural boundaries.
Let's run through some of these admirers, starting with Ingmar Bergman.
Bergman, another titan of world cinema who dealt heavily in psychological drama, openly called his own film The Virgin Spring a lousy imitation of Kurosawa, admitting he was trying to channel the Japanese master's style.
That's a remarkable admission of awe from one genius to another.
It is. Meanwhile, Federico Fellini offered perhaps the ultimate compliment to Kurosawa's holistic approach. He considered him the greatest living example of all that an author of the cinema should be.
Recognizing his complete mastery over every single aspect of production.
Exactly. And Satyajit Ray described the effect of seeing Rashomon as electric, praising its sustained and dazzling proof of a director's command.
And of course, the Hollywood contingent, which eventually saved his career in the 80s.
George Lucas didn't just cite The Hidden Fortress as inspiration for Star Wars. He said that Kurosawa's films were one of his strongest sources of creative inspiration, because the emotions they conveyed were so potent that cultural barriers just ceased to exist.
Steven Spielberg cited Kurosawa's vision as shaping his own, and Sidney Lumet elevated him to another level, calling Kurosawa the Beethoven of movie directors.
Even Stanley Kubrick, known for his relentless pursuit of technical perfection, consistently spoke of Kurosawa admiringly, viewing him as one of the very few directors worthy of the title great. The consistency of praise across such diverse stylistic voices just confirms his universal mastery.
We should circle back to some of the critiques, particularly the charge from some circles that Kurosawa was too westernized.
Yes, critics of the French New Wave, notably Jacques Rivette, often favored Kenji Mizoguchi over Kurosawa, viewing Kurosawa as too heavily influenced by Western literary classics, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and European genre films.
So the very thing that made him globally accessible and revolutionary.
He was sometimes held against him by purists seeking a more authentically Japanese cinema. And domestically, that charge of elitism persisted, the idea that he catered to Western tastes by focusing on heroic samurai figures.
However, as we discussed, Kurosawa's films consistently showed the failure of the samurai class and the enduring strength of the peasants, suggesting this critique often missed the political subtlety beneath the spectacle.
Absolutely. And although he couldn't achieve his wish to die on set, his creative life continued posthumously through his unfilmed screenplays.
Following his death, several were brought to the screen by protégés. After the Rain in '99 and The Sea is Watching in 2002 were both produced.
Furthermore, the script he originally wrote for the doomed Club of the Four Knights, Dora Hayda, was finally filmed and released in 2000 by the only surviving member of the club, Kon Ichikawa. His narratives kept going, even when his body could not.
His legacy isn't just cinematic, it's an entire institution. The Kurosawa Production Company, established way back in 1959, is still running today, now headed by his son, Hisao.
And that company works closely with the Akira Kurosawa Foundation, organizing projects that maintain his legacy and protect his intellectual property. This institutional structure is crucial for maintaining control over his artistic heritage.
The demand for his stories is so high that in 2011, the remake rights to most of his films and unproduced screenplays were assigned to an LA-based company called Splendent.
Which is a huge confirmation of the power of his narrative scaffolding. The stated aim is explicitly to help contemporary filmmakers introduce a new generation of moviegoers to these unforgettable stories. This acknowledges that his foundational stories are so robust and universal that they can be continually retold and recontextualized.
And finally, Kurosawa was a massive figure in Japan. He was the first filmmaker to receive Japan's Order of Culture in 1985, confirming his status as a cultural giant both at home and abroad. 2 film awards are named in his honor, ensuring that future generations of filmmakers striving for excellence will always have his name attached to their highest aspirations.
To synthesize Kurosawa's 6 decades, we've seen him navigate an incredible, almost impossible arc. He moved from being a frustrated painter, surviving profound personal tragedy and loss, to becoming a defining figure of post-war cinema. He navigated intense censorship, weathered the devastating collapse of his Hollywood detours, enduring professional betrayal and personal collapse.
Only to return triumphantly to cinema through the unwavering faith of a new generation of American patrons.
And what ultimately makes him an emperor is his ability to create a truly global cinematic language, a mastery of synthesis.
Absolutely. He brilliantly blended Western literary classics, Shakespeare, Tolstoy, and popular genre tropes like the Western and the police procedural, integrating them seamlessly with traditional Japanese staging like no theater and deep philosophical exploration into universal human themes.
The result is work that transcends national boundaries, giving us foundational cinematic texts like Rashomon and Seven Samurai. And the power of persistence is the overwhelming takeaway from his life.
That ability to return from professional and personal collapse, that period between his firing in 1968 and his suicide attempt in 1971, and then deliver two monumental, internationally produced epics, Kagemusha and Ran, in his 70s.
It's a profound case study in artistic resilience. It shows that even when the world rejects you, an artist's vision can still find patronage.
Which brings us back full circle to the quote he gave in 1990 while accepting his Lifetime Achievement Oscar. Kurosawa, who possessed the technical mastery to design, write, direct, and edit every element of his films, famously said, "I'm a little worried because I don't feel that I understand cinema yet."
That phrase, spoken by the man we call the Emperor of Cinema, is the perfect closing thought.
If a director of Kurosawa's technical mastery and vast influence, who mastered everything from the axial cut to the emotional texture of his sound design, still didn't feel he fully understood cinema at the age of 80, what deeper, more elusive element of the craft was he still striving for? Was he seeking a narrative truth that always remained just out of reach? Or does true mastery in any art form simply lead to a profound realization of how much more there is left to learn? We'll leave you to mull on that.